If Caleb Hammer ever hosted a show for CIOs, this would be it. Because let's be honest, some of our IT budgets could really use an intervention. You've been financing innovation at 27% interest, stacking systems on systems, and wondering why transformation feels like a treadmill? In this episode, Pete and I unpack the real cost of tech debt, the duplicate platforms, the forgotten apps, the risk you don't even see, and how to finally clean house without stopping innovation. So grab your metaphorical credit report, because today, your tech stack's getting roasted, Caleb Hammer style. Hey, Pete.
Hey, Kat. Good to be here.
Do you know Caleb Hammer?
No, I don't.
So today I'm going to be channeling my inner Caleb. And so for those that don't know, Caleb is a TikTok, YouTube influencer.
Oh, not my generation then.
Well, he has a show where he basically brings in people that need a massive intervention on financial debt, right? And he roasts them, absolutely roasts them. It's like cringy to watch, but also he's very funny and they need it. And they know what they're getting themselves into and they need it.
This definitely sounds like one of your sort of shows.
Absolutely.
Yeah, correct.
And the reason I'm channeling my inner Caleb is today we're going to talk about tech debt, every CIO's worst nightmare. Now, if Caleb was sitting here, this is what I think he would say.
Oh, well,
Pete,
am I going to be roasted here?
Pete, you've been financing innovation at 27% interest. And I'm staring at your architecture diagram. Why do you have 6 CRMs and no plan? What the hell were you thinking? Should I have done that with an American accent?
Yeah, maybe. What was I thinking? Good question.
But this concept of, like, obviously tech debt's a real thing, and everyone's struggling to cope with it. Do we need an intervention?
Do we need an intervention? Look, firstly, it's not a new problem, and it's not an IT problem. This is an organizational problem that we actually have to fight for.
Talk me through that.
Yeah. So, firstly, I think generally what happens is organizations go, hey, I've got to find costs. I've got to get cost out. So what do? You build a list, and then you look at that list and you go, all right, there's all my critical ones. These run an airline. They run my bank. They run, my postal services or my delivery center. And then you start scaling down. Then you get into these the rats and mice or the little ones and twos. All right. And then you find out and you go, all right, we're going to start going through. And then you find out Jimmy in finance still uses this one application and won't let you shut it down. But we've lost sight of. And so we go through this exercise. We eventually work through, we might save 5% because we go and turn off a couple of systems that we find. And then we throw the list away. And we don't actually then spend any time thinking about it. And because, we don't design into the organization a process to go, actually, this is something we should be thinking about this all the time. And we should run this register all the time and have a scoring about where is that debt and is it getting worse over a period of time? Bit like, maybe Caleb talks about it from a financial perspective about, if I just buy more credit cards and never pay them off.
Oh, no, you pay off credit cards with credit cards.
Yeah, exactly. So more bad debt.
So let's invest in more technology to sticky tape over the crappy technology that we're paying a fortune to keep running.
Correct.
All right, so let's talk tech debt. Define it. What is it?
Yeah, good question. So tech debt, I think, has many different forms. In my mind, it can firstly just be legacy applications, costly to maintain, presenting new risk to the organization. All right. So, so what are we going to do with those? Like, are we going to reinvent it? We're going to move it to a cloud. Generally what sort of happens is, or I think the other side is we've got parts of our business using old work practices. So we've still got old applications sitting in there that are being used by one or two people, but invisibly apparently stitching together the organization, and Jimmy won't let us turn it off. That's sort of the conversation we get. So I think from my mind, that's sort of the two areas that we really see when we focus on technical debt. And what it does is just slows down the ability of the organization to be innovative or to change, because you feel like you've got to stitch all these difficult systems back together to get work done.
So a couple of the obvious signs, obviously Jimmy and his application that he refused to let us turn off.
Yeah.
Other signs of growing tech debt, obviously high maintenance bills on platforms that maybe haven't been updated for a while. Workarounds, people that are working around systems, that's a pretty classic sign that you've got some tech debt sitting there that needs to be cleaned out.
Yeah.
Duplicate platforms, I feel like that's a hot topic at the moment. Like, we've got one of every CRM, or we've got one of every word processing document.
Yeah, it's like, it was another, I remember this, it's like Smartsheet. like another version of Excel.
That popped up
It
a
did.
couple of months ago.
Yeah. But I remember, I think I put it in 10 years ago, and it was cool. It had these great little macros in it, but it just spread like a virus into the organization because everybody loved it. But we ended up with going, well, why do I need 3 versions of this thing? So I think what happens is we put things in, but we don't have a register and we don't track them over time, and we don't put a score or a measurement to it, which then allows this a bit. We just artificially increases this debt because we're not actually tracking it or keeping an eye on it.
I think one of the types of tech debt that probably gives me the most concern is occasionally you come across a vendor that really doesn't want to play with others in the sandpit. And so they shut down their platform, they shut down their technology, and they don't create integration points for customers to use, which means companies then have to go away and create those themselves. And so every time a vendor upgrades a platform or a tool that touches this integration point, the organization has to go and get the integration point working again. And it just seems to be a lot of work that is unnecessary. So I kind of feel like, particularly as we move into, with the innovation coming with AI, moving more into agentic, that responsibility on technology vendors to provide those integration points for organizations so that they don't have to build tech debt, I think is going to be really critical.
Yeah, it's an interesting one to see how that's going to evolve, actually. Because no one solution is the answer for every part of it for an organization. So I think organizations just see this as vendor lock-in. All right, costs increase, you can't do anything, you can't change it, you can't access the data. But I think we're going to see that collapse in the next couple of years as each of those, like big RPs, are going to become much more functional and really smart databases as the advent of AI really kicks into gear in this space. So interesting concept. Not sure where they want to go, Kat, to be fair.
We often talk about the importance of cleaning house before you try and do anything with it. And I think this is it's a pretty classic, you can't innovate until you've got your foundations right. Imagine trying to build a second story on your house when you've got rotting walls. And so this concept of take the time to clean out tech debt, to get the foundations right so that then you can innovate on top of, so that you're not building more tech debt that needs to be unwound further down the track.
Yeah, the house analogy is a good one, but I think part of it is, do you have to renovate do you have to do all of it, all the foundations before you can start? Or can you start room by room?
Patch the hole in the wall.
Well, maybe you pick part of you might pick, like if the absolute foundations are falling apart, it's a different thing. But I think most organizations I find they've got foundations that are there. But what they try to do is they try and take a full enterprise approach to it rather than going, actually, let's pick some really clever use cases or stories that we want to solve for and go, actually, we're gonna get the whole vertical piece done. Whereas organizations try and go horizontally. And I think that's when it takes a long time. It's like chatting with a customer yesterday, actually, and they were talking about, knowledge management. And this is another good example of like tech debt. How many times have we tried to go back and clear up knowledge articles in an old SharePoint system? So we dream up this big program, we get started, and about 18 months later, we're on lose interest. Again, we haven't built a process or a system into the organization to keep these things live and real. And so versus now, I think the new approach is, especially with the advent of some of the new technology, is to go, actually, let's get it right for down through the vertical, and rather than trying to solve the entire enterprise on day one.
And I feel like at ServiceNow, we've fallen into this trap occasionally. So even in the 4 years I've been here, there have been moments where we've gone and built a custom app and put a lot of focus into building this amazing app. And then as soon as it's launched, we've kind of realized it didn't really solve the problem that we thought we had. Part of managing tech debt is being able to put your hand up and go, hey, this wasn't worth it, kill it. So that you're not continuing to build tech debt on top of tech debt on top of tech debt.
Well, I think it counted
losses.
Well, yeah, but I think it's also, but maybe it sold it for a point in time.
Maybe.
So like COVID,
maybe
COVID's
some of them
a great
didn't
example.
pay.
Well, maybe. So you got to look at both sides, but I think that's where you got to go back to. If you don't have a process and a system of actually looking at this on a regular basis, you'll just get sprawl. So everyone remembers the Lotus Notes era. Like how many Lotus Notes apps got built?
I was at IBM during the Lotus Notes era.
Yeah, so you've probably got better stories to share about how much you've seen about this.
The funniest stories I have around Lotus Notes is that I would be going to work at IBM and we would be working with companies to actively get them off Lotus Notes because it was great during its time,
Mm.
but then it became sprawl and there were better ways to solve these problems. But I was going home and my husband was telling me about the great things they were building in Lotus Notes because he works in accounting and accounting's always 5-10 years behind the rest of the industry. So it was,
That's
yeah.
harsh.
I'm not saying my marriage was founded on Lotus Notes conversations at the dinner table.
I hope not.
But there were a couple of giggles.
But actually, so I think it comes back for me is that, again, that's what I like about our platform is, and a lot of the conversation I have with customers about our platform is, the hidden thing is you get visibility and transparency about what's there. So if you build these apps and they're not being used, spin them back down so they don't just sit there and take up capacity and add risk to your profile and someone might use it accidentally. And I think that's what we've sort of lost is you've got to make it a process. It's got to be part of it's got to be part of your foundations as to keep the organization alive and healthy.
And I think one of the concerns around tech debt is not just the cost, it's the exposure, because older technology that's not been maintained well is higher risk of cyber threat. And I hate to say it, but one of the banks in Australia, not one of the big banks, but one of the banks in Australia does still run a whole bunch of applications on Lotus Notes. And when we sat in front of the whiteboard and they mapped out their IT architecture, I was mortified because all I could sit there thinking was, that's a weakness. And if you don't shut down that weakness, you're just exposing the entire organization.
Yeah, and
they only need one foothold.
Yeah, correct. Well, and we've seen lots of those examples recently, the sort of social engineering capability of the threat attackers to get in and get information is, and we've armed them with this whole generative AI capability in a whole new way. So there's one of my peers in the UK talks about everyone being a risk officer. Risk is not one person's responsibility. It's actually everybody in the organization. It's the same as cyber. It's not just the CISO's responsibility. Everyone has to have this awareness. And so, again, for me, if you go back and think about it, it's not a one-off exercise. This is something that has to live and breathe in the organization. Then I think our mindset shifts to going, actually, there's something we have to monitor over a period of time and then go, actually, now is the time to turn that application off because it presents too much risk or it's too costly to maintain, or there's a different version of that now that we should be moving to that completely outdoes it. And maybe our ways of working have fundamentally outdone the old technology.
So my inner Caleb would be sitting here thinking, debt is manageable if you have a plan, catastrophic if you don't.
Yes.
So what does good tech debt management look like?
Good tech debt management is, firstly, not just being a tech problem, it needs to be a business problem. All right. It needs to have an understanding about. And so I think if it's built into the business leadership about how they're thinking about their business, how they're thinking about risk, how they're thinking about the technology that supports their business and being the best technology for that business, I think you get a very different mindset. Where it's left as this is a technology problem to solve, then we're going to make independent decisions about technology and we're going to turn the application off on Jimmy, not knowing that he needs it to actually run the business. And I think they're the sort of two spectrums.
I think the other ones I would add to that, one is just like bare foundations, having visibility of what you've got.
Transparency.
Because I feel like a lot of organizations don't even know what they've got. Yeah. So step one, just get visibility into that. Clear ownership and accountability. Like if Jimmy is going to put his hat on keeping this application running, who is responsible for owning that application and, paying for the maintenance and making sure that it is locked down and secure and all those sorts of things that are critical across any technology workplace. The third one I would add, and this is probably one that is pretty passionate to what we do, is think about what your platform strategy is and where possible, use out of the box so that you're putting innovation and work into the areas where you get competitive advantage, not into the areas that are just going to create tech debt with no value.
Yeah, I think the only other one I would add to that is that try to understand about how to have a measurement associated to it. Like, how do you measure technical debt? And then also think about what impact that is having to the organization on terms of outcome for business outcomes. And I think if you get those two elements to it, so one, you get transparency. So you've got a register, you've got a health score or a risk score or a tech debt score, then you think about business impact. And I think once you start to have that and you have a life cycle around that and you ingrain it into the organization, then I think you get good practices.
Have you seen examples where people have done that well?
Have I seen examples? No, not particularly, to be fair. It seems to be like when we go back to one of our earlier podcasts, we were talking about, organizations still focus on cost and trying to get cost out. But I think what I am seeing is a shift in customers going, actually, we've got to get ahead of this problem much in a very different way. And I think you're still seeing, like you were talking about one of the banks still having, was it Lotus Notes application still running? Like there are still banks still running very manual processes for things where you think about startup banks and their disruption. They're entirely digital processes now in a very different way. So I think the digital organizations have a bigger foothold and start in this place and using technology differently. I think the legacy, older organizations still struggle with this heavily.
So if someone hasn't gotten started with this yet, what would be step one? Getting visibility and just creating that tech debt register, at least so that you know what you have to work with?
Yeah, I think you have to know what you're working with. Like if you don't know where your assets are and what risks they're exposing to your organization, you might have holes that you're creating inadvertently, not through intention, but it's sitting there and they're going to, at some point, will get exposed.
And I love this concept you raise about making sure that the business is part of it, because I think it's often seen as something that is owned by the CIO. But no one is better than the business to flag what's tech debt, because they will turn around and tell you, oh, no, we don't use that app. It's crap. We export to Excel, or we send around emails. They're the ones that know what's not being used in the field. And so making sure that they are part of the story and can flag that seems like the low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of those little things like low-hanging fruit, but I think technology's role is to help educate, like it was with security. We have to help educate the business so they're aware of some of those things, and because they're not naturally going to become aware of those things. Like they probably see the cost of maintenance, but they don't necessarily see the risk profile that's creating or the threats that might open to them as an organization. And nobody wants to see their employee or customer data sitting out on a public website.
I suspect I know how you're going to answer this, but I'm going to ask it anyway because I think it's an important question. Do you have to down tools and do the work to stabilize the core, or can you almost operate in two different speeds where you're working down your tech debt, but you're still innovating in other parts of the business? To your point, renovating one room, not necessarily the whole house.
Yeah, look, I think it's a costly exercise to stop the whole organization, and especially right now, we think about how fast some of the technology is moving around us. And, I've been having this conversation with a few customers recently, which is like, well, how do I keep innovating around the edges when everything else is, these big changes like ERP modernization programs take years, but we can't stop the business because in 3 years, how many startups are going to start challenging us? And so we have to, organizations, have to find ways to continue to innovate at the edges. If they have to go and clean the core up to make the organization more efficient in the end.
It's such a hot topic, particularly right now when every conversation is about how do we take out cost. Yep. And you sit there going, well, if you sat down and looked at your tech debt and worked out what you could turn off. Final thoughts, Pete?
Final thoughts. I think simply don't wait to start. This is another one of those AI-like moments. If you don't get on the train, you don't get ahead of this, it's going to come back and bite you really badly at some point. So I think start to build a systematic way, get transparency of what's out there, find your applications, and start to have those difficult conversations. And realize it's not it's not about perfection. You're not going to get it right on day one. You're probably not going to get it right on day 10, but you've got to make this a process in your organization so you can actually sustain it over the long term. How about you, Kat? How would you summarize today?
Look, I'm going back to Caleb.
Oh no, I forgot about him in my TikTok.
Yeah, don't let it get so bad that Caleb has to come in and roast your IT budget, and because he's just going to tell you shouldn't buy a Lamborghini on a payday loan. I'm keeping it real.
Is that the joke?
I'm keeping it real for you.
I didn't get a green Lamborghini, I'm sure.
Yeah, I wish.
Yeah.
Just the importance of, as you think about innovation and pushing the boundaries, making sure that you've constantly got that continuous finger on the pulse of keeping tech debt low and not creating more where it doesn't need to be created.
Yeah, there's the concept of good debt and bad debt, in finances. And so we want to get rid of the bad debt. And the only way to do that is you've got to start and you've got to have the transparency really quickly. So
I'm going to go and write our TikTok plan for Peter McDonnell, the Caleb of IT budget roasting. On that note, thanks, Pete.
Thanks, Kat. That was very interesting. I wasn't expecting that one.